Welcome to the very first episode of Alpha Whisperers Genesis, where we are going to explore the hidden world of the quiet power behind the power. The hidden dynamics shaping leadership and decision-making at the highest levels of business, government, and beyond. I'm Dr. Laura Sicola, and today we're going to explore what it means to be an Alpha Whisperer. In other words, the individuals whose counsel shapes the decisions that affect us all. And I am excited to join the creator of the Alpha Whisperers brand and the CEO of Alpha Whisperers International Network, who's also the chairman for the Foundation for the Support of the United Nations, and the chairman and CEO of SGG Holding Company, J.C.Salazar. Janet, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this journey with you.
And thank you, Laura, for joining me in this journey. I am excited to talk to you about everything Alpha Whisperers and also invite our audience and listeners to join us in this journey.
Yes, and a journey it is going to be. But, start by telling us, why does this matter? Why were you so compelled to create a podcast and, frankly, an entire brand focusing on the concept of the Alpha Whisperer, the advisors? And what's your ultimate goal?
So, Laura, I have always considered myself a student, an influencer, and an architect for leadership. I have embraced this mission to not only be able to help shape where leadership is headed, but most importantly, help influence where we are currently when we talk about leadership situations, not just, in our country per se, but globally. So I've always been, obsessed about constantly rethinking, right? What leadership frameworks work, what do not work, etc. And through all this over 20 years of my career, both in business and public sector, and also what I do with the United Nations, I realized that there is that untapped or not usually talked about power and influence and dynamics that goes on behind the scene. And I started to talk about that, but that's more later. But, just to answer your question, I started to dig deeper into these kinds of dynamics, not only because I got so interested and it became so mysterious to me as well, what goes on behind the scene, right, in terms of decision making, but when I looked at my own experience over 20 plus years of being into this entire ecosystem of decision making at the top level, being an advisor, being a confidant to some of the most influential leaders across the globe, what I realized is that really behind the scene, we do not see a lot of times what goes on in there. And we do not realize that that is actually where a lot of those very important, influential, powerful decisions happen.
Yes.
Yeah. And with what's going on around the world right now, I started to see that, wait a minute, there has to be something that's more powerful that could influence the world of leadership for the better. But this is what inspired me to dig deeper into the entire world of advising behind the scene and strategizing behind the scene. And that's how I came up with the Alpha Whisperers.
Yes. It sounds a lot like if you've seen Hamilton, anybody who's seen the musical, that there's that song about being in the room where it happens. That if you're not in that room where it happens, you don't know what's happening, who's involved, who's promised what. And there's a real lack of transparency when that happens, and it can snowball from there. So what's the purpose of this program and of the brand overall, creating the Alpha Whisperers International Network?
Laura, if you think about what's going on in the world right now, right? Geopolitical, economics, the current events pretty much, you'll see that a lot of the decision making that happens is really kind of limited, if you may. Right. And a lot of times, even the private sector, when CEOs decide about, for example, capital and stuff, they only look at the numbers. They hardly look at the human side of things. So there are three very succinct goals behind Alpha Whisperers that I think is needed at this time. Number one, I really want there to be a more humanized and democratized decision making at the top level. Okay. That's very important, because if we're going to move forward as a civilization that is more inclusive and that is more future forward with the policies and decisions that we do, I think that decision making has to be humanized and democratized.
So let me make sure I'm understanding. So by humanizing, it's remembering that there are people attached to the numbers. It's
Exactly.
not just numbers. And democratizing is the accountability piece of we need to know what our leaders are deciding on our behalf, and we need to tell them if we're not happy with it, and they need to listen to us. They can't just rubber stamp whatever they want and not tell anybody.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And we do this by my goal number 2, which is really reframing how power and influence work, that dynamic between influence and power, how they work when it comes to decision making. I want to reframe that by tapping into, again, the alpha whisperers, who are the advisors and strategists and counsels and confidants behind these world leaders. The number 3 goal, to answer your question, is, of course, with all this, we have developed quite a few supporting elements of this entire Alpha Whispers framework so that it makes way for creating a pipeline of a new breed of Alpha Whispers. And this is exactly the part that I'm so excited about, because yes, we want these changes, but how do we make these changes happen in such a way that they are durable and solid? What you
Yes.
do is you create a pipeline of a new breed of Alpha Whisperers. So we'll talk more about that later, but these are the 3 goals that I have to answer your question as far as why Alpha Whisperers and why now.
I love it. Okay, so we've got democratizing the decision making, increasing accountability, as I heard in part 2, and then understanding that every whisper counts, and needs to be the focus of the new breed, as you're calling them, for our future alpha whisperers to change the world the way we want it to be. I love it. So how did this get started? Where did the traction come from for the Alpha Whisperers International Network?
So the term alpha whispers actually it never existed, and I coined it all the way back early 2018.
Wow.
And it has something to do with my love for horses and being surrounded by friends who are horse whisperers. So
Yes.
that's for another story later. But
Okay.
that was the kind of like the seed of it, and I didn't really get a lot into it because, again, I have my day job. I'm so busy navigating both what I do with my foundation and my companies, right? And it wasn't until early spring of 2022 when I answered the call, open call of the Rockefeller Foundation Bellagio Residency Program to submit a concept or a project that will qualify you to be chosen as one of the residents of the Rockefeller Foundation Bellagio Residency Program. And this is a very prestigious, if not the most prestigious program of the Rockefeller Foundation, where they incubate and support breakthrough ideas from leaders and authors and producers and creators and, name it, from all over the world who has these fresh new ideas that needs to be put out there. And so I submitted my application, and there's like thousands of applicants from around the world. And so, makes the story short, they invited me to be one of the residents in the fall of, I got this great news, in the fall of 2022. And my residency happened March of 2023. And this was the most pivotal role for Alpha Whisperers as a book project. That was the start of it, because I had the entire month of March just really focus developing the Alpha Whispers concept and framework, specifically not just for the book, but again, as an entire global leadership framework as well. So imagine being able to freely do that in Lake Como in Bellagio, supported by the Rockefeller Foundation. So that was the start of it. It made a fundamental difference in shaping what the Alpha Whispers is going to be, the potential of it in terms of revolutionizing and reframing global leadership. And it has been such an exciting journey for me with the Rockefeller Foundation.
It sounds like it, and we can't wait until the book is ready, since it sounds like that's the cornerstone for the whole brand, and then everything else is going to spin off from that, like this podcast, among other things, which is great, and I'm super excited to be part of it with you. Now, let's start with the basics. The term you mentioned, that Alpha Whisperer, came, related to, I think it was Robert Redford, who was the original horse whisperer in the movie, maybe, which is a great film a million years ago. But when you talk about an alpha whisperer, what does that mean?
So simply, Laura, if you get it from the horse whisperer, right? So these are the strategists and the counsels and the advisors the confidence behind the alphas or the world's most powerful leader. So our presidents, CEOs, the Secretary General of the United Nations, our governors, name it, whoever, is in that powerful position, whom I call alpha, right? The alpha whisperers are the ones that are behind them, but are equally, if not even more influential in shaping decisions that gets implemented day in and day out, and that affects millions of lives across the world.
Yes, yes. Okay, so the trusted counselors whispering in the ears, perhaps, or yelling. We don't know what happens behind those doors because we're not in the room where it happens. But who's got the ear of the person who has the power to make those ultimate decisions? This is who we're focusing on.
Exactly. Yes.
All right.
Yeah. And, I want to emphasize the power of these whispers because they really, to your point, they have the ears of the world's most powerful leaders. So in the context of global leadership and, the context of how we're framing our conversations here, just also to help our audience understand, right, where I'm coming from and the purpose of our conversation is that, right, when I talk about leadership and alpha whispers, that's what it is, that these alpha whisperers have the exclusive ear of the world's most powerful decision makers. And to us, it's very important.
Yes, yes, 100%. So let's talk about that historical existence of the alpha whisperer, because you coined the term, but you didn't create the role, right? As you mentioned, you noticed this pattern over time that needed to be explored. And how much time are we talking about? Is this something that's been over the last 100 years or so, or something that's been since the beginning of time, as it were?
Laura, it's been there since the beginning of time, right? Again, like I said, I created the lexicon, but since the beginning of time, as an example, during the monarchies and the dynasties of the past, there has always been these advisors advising the kings and queens. There's always been this, what I call alpha whisperers, right? As an example, Queen Elizabeth I, Sir William Cecil was her advisor during her term because she was a child when she inherited the throne to be the Queen of England.
Yes.
And so she had Sir William Cecil. In the case of China, for example, there was Zhou Enlai, as a very powerful alpha whisperer of that time. And again, we have these ambassadors, right? We have this chief of staff and senior advisors of presidents and CEOs. So all these are examples of what I call now alpha whisperers.
Yeah, so these are people, they have many different official titles, job descriptions, those kinds of things, but they all serve this same function or set of functions, it sounds like. But the advisors, as you pointed out earlier, are not themselves the final decision makers. So if they're not the final decision makers, why should they still be held responsible?
This is one of my favorite questions that I get asked because, yes, they are behind the scene, right? But it is exactly that they have to be held responsible and accountable because they have the exclusive ear of the alpha, of the leader, right? In a lot of times, because these whisperers are themselves very powerful and influential leaders in their own way, they know the strategies. They are well versed of what's going on, even a lot of times more than the alpha. The more that I want to hold them a much higher accountability or standard of accountability, because every whisper that they give to the alpha could really result into affecting millions and billions of lives down the line. So really my personal call to action, if you may, as the creator of Alpha Whisperer is that I'm talking to you right now, all of you who consider yourself now as Alpha Whisperers, that you cannot hide behind the alpha when you give those whispers. I want you to feel that accountability, that every whisper that you give to alpha matters, especially those who are officially appointed, as an example, as chief of staff and advisors to the most powerful leaders, not just politically, but business, the nonprofit, and academia, and all these influential institutions.
Yes, it's interesting because as you're talking, the analogy that comes to mind is with social media, that the alphas are the ones who are in front, the whisperers are behind the scenes. So it's like with people who want to make comments, whether it's on YouTube or on Facebook or on, internal platforms of sorts, it's like people will hide behind the anonymity of their handle or their social media. They say whatever they want. They don't worry about whose feelings they hurt or whose reputation they hurt, whether it's bullying, personal attacks, posting false information. They can throw the grenade in and then just hide. And there's no accountability. There's no responsibility for the impact that that has. And the fact is, words do hurt people, but they don't need to care about that because they click send and then log off and kind of leave it alone. But the fact is, that's not how society moves forward. That's how it stays still. That's how it moves backwards, perhaps. But if we want it to move forward strongly, then, whether you're posting online or whispering to a president, all words do have impact. They do influence decisions and they do influence people's thoughts and feelings. So just for everybody altogether to be more conscious about the fact that our words have impact and to take responsibility for those, and ideally have some more public accountability as well for what we contribute verbally, publicly, or in private. So I'll get off my soapbox, but does that sound about right, Janet?
Yes, thank you, Laura. That's a really cool analogy. And yeah, I agree. I mean, that's so related with Alpha Whispers, right? Because again, it's behind the scene. So to your point, just because you think you're able to operate behind the scene, right, doesn't mean that you can, just say things that will not have repercussions or negative impact down the line, because they do. So this is a call to action in the same way with everyone who identifies as Alpha Whisperers. Again, like I said, especially those who are official in that kind of position of being advisors and strategists and counsels, right, to
Sure.
our leaders. Yeah, to be very accountable.
So how can a series like this, and we're launching this as a mini series today to begin, but how can a series even scratch the surface to make an impact on such a massive issue?
I think it really comes down, Laura, to realizing the importance of that whisper.
Okay.
Right. So again, you identify as one, whether from the top level, as an example, a whisperer to the president or a top CEO, or in your team, right? You have a team in your company, etc. Being able to now realize the implication or the impact of your whisper to the alpha, to be able to be more conscious of that, be more intentional of the whisper that you give to the alpha. That's very important. And a cliche, probably, if I would say that we're going to make this change one whisper at a time, but I would love to put it out there for our audience and listeners to be able to relate better, right?
Sure.
It's as simple as that. If we want to be able to change our leadership specifically and the status quo of our leadership and the current landscape of leadership in whatever level it is, we have to realize really that every whisper counts, and we're going to change that one whisper at a time.
Yes. What I'm hearing, and I want to clarify if this is accurate, that it's not the listeners out there who we want to take this personally. It's not just about if they happen to be whispering to a recognized alpha, let's put it that way, but that no matter who they're advising can be in a much simpler job or not in a professional environment, in a personal space, a home or community, etc., that we're all giving input to people, sometimes behind closed doors and sometimes more out in public, but to recognize the impact of the advice that we give and thinking about the overall value that we're contributing. I heard, gosh, I don't know why I just remembered this. A million years ago, I read an article and it was an interview with Billy Crystal, the comedian, the actor. And the reporter asked him if he was the class clown in high school. And he said, no, I wasn't the class clown. I was the class comedian. And she said, well, what's the difference? And he said, well, the class clown's the guy who runs out on the football field naked, but the class comedian is the guy who talks him into it.
I love that. Yes, that is a...
So now he wasn't necessarily alpha whispering. It might have been like beta or gamma or omega whispering way at the bottom of the totem pole. But, you had someone's ear and you got them to do something. Now, maybe it was really funny, but we have to think through what are the ripple effects of this? Who does it hurt? Who does it help, et cetera? So
exactly.
Whispers have impact.
Yes.
So
Exactly. Yeah, that I love that. Yes.
Not to
I'm
make
sure
light
it
of truly.
resonates with our audience.
Yes, we're not going to talk any presidents or anybody else into running out on the football fields naked. That's just a terrible idea. Don't go there.
You know what, Laura? And that's exactly why I actually want and envision our conversation here to be part educational or informative and part investigative, because
Okay.
there really are a lot of examples out there when you talk about alpha whisperers.
So when you talk about investigative, we're talking about investigative journalism, or for our listeners to start to investigate themselves, or where's the investigation outside of what's educational in and of itself?
Well, it could be both ways, but for the purpose of our conversation, it's leaning more towards investigative journalism, right? Yeah, because I really want this to have an impact in terms of what's going to be talked about when leadership is discussed, right? And, you know, with investigative journalism, it's really going to lead us also into the way of setting more examples, real life examples of alpha whisperers whose whispers have changed or have impacted the trajectory of decisions made at the top level.
Got it. Okay, so this is a lot more than just a historical deep dive, but that is where we're going to start. So understanding that recognizing the power of the alpha whisperer helps us to connect with our own influence, whether as leaders or advisors. So let's take us really quickly through the rest of this series, the mini series that we're doing here today, and give us a sense of why we should subscribe. What's in episode 2? What's coming up for us?
Episode 2 is very exciting because it's all about the anatomy of alpha whisperers. So again, part educational, because we're going to take everyone into the journey of knowing or getting to know the DNA of alpha whisperers. So we're going to deep dive into their traits and roles and characteristics and what sets them apart from the alphas. And that's why they're alpha whisperers, you know, these kinds of things. What dictates their appetite for whispering? What opportunities are they more inclined to be whispering? These kinds of things. So yeah, really exciting. So we're, you know, really dissecting, if you may, going into that anatomy of the alpha whisperer.
Okay, and how about episode 3?
Episode 3 is all about ego. As you
Ooh.
know, yeah, this is one thing. I mean, all of us have egos. As, you know,
Sure.
it's a basic human nature. But what separates the alpha and the whisperer fundamentally is that I'm not saying whisperers do not have ego. They do, of course, but it's a different kind of ego. And it's something that they're actually willing to set aside. You know, and that's why they're comfortable working behind the scene. Whereas if you talk about alphas, I'm one of the alphas, you know, and I'm also a whisperer. But as an alpha, you know, part of my ego is that I really love to be on stage and talk. I like the spotlight. I like the megaphone. I like my soapbox, where I can talk to people about what I'm doing in terms of leadership, as an example, or simply my business. But the alpha whisperers, again, that's my ego, of course, right? And, you know, and all that other thing. But with alpha whisperers, they are really comfortable just operating from behind the scene. But that doesn't mean that they do not have egos as big as the alphas. So I'm excited about that. Very specific conversations for episode 3.
Okay, and how about episode 4?
Now, episode 4, we are going to talk about doing a deep dive into the dark whispers. And what I mean is these decisions that are gone wrong, or leadership gone wrong because of bad decisions that resulted from mostly the dark whispers of the alpha whisperers. Of course, I'm not saying that the alphas have nothing to do with it, but because this is an alpha whisperer topic and platform, we are going to focus on the roles of this historical, and we're taking the conversation as well into the present times, as far as the darker side of alpha whisperers and the dark whispers that they have done that have unfortunately impacted our world negatively.
Okay. So, and is this a combination of both leadership gone wrong, meaning the whispers that were well-intended but bad advice and mistakes because stuff wasn't checked well, or because there was an ulterior motive and there was no accountability for that, so they went rogue, so to speak?
Both.
Oh,
actually.
good. All right.
And
So we're going to
then
leave it there.
some. Yeah,
Yes.
both and then some. And thank you for mentioning the rogue decisions, because that's actually going to be a very important part of these entire conversations around leadership gone wrong. We're going to talk about rogue alphas, right?
Okay.
And how that dynamic is, when it comes to the alpha whisperers. So yeah, that's very intriguing, actually.
All right. Well, I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to that. A little bit of drama, never made for bad television
Yes.
last time I checked. Okay. So, and then what about episode 5? Where do we go from there?
Oh, episode 5, this is where we rally everyone, and I mean Alpha Whisperers to be exact, right? To take a look at the more positive Alpha Whisperer role models through time, right? So we're going to talk about the characteristics, the positive traits, if you may, that are key to answering the question why Alpha Whisperers were able to influence decisions that have benefited the greater good, basically.
Yes.
Positive influence. So that's the contrast with the previous episode of the Dark Whispers. So these are the positive ones. Yeah.
And I think it was Einstein who said the only rational way to educate is to be an example of what not to be if one can't be the other sort. So here we're going to really do both, right? We'll show examples, case studies of whispers that were done effectively, worked with alphas effectively, successfully for good results from good intentions, and the opposite, as it were. So we'll look at both sides.
Yeah.
And last but not least, how are we going to wrap up this mini-series?
Oh, this is the most exciting part. Okay. So we're going to wrap up this mini-series when we talk about the new breed of Alpha Whisperers.
Okay.
Yeah. And to me, this is the most exciting part because we get to talk about a more future-forward, visionary, realistic, timely call to action as far as creating a pipeline of a new breed of Alpha Whisperers. So taking into account what we've learned from the Alpha Whisperers of the past.
Yes.
So from our episode 1 to episode 5, putting that together and at the same time incorporating the tools of the times, I call them, which is AI, right?
Yes.
Quantum innovation.
Boy, that's for sure.
Diversity, definitely. The next generation, women, right? So tapping into this future forward, more tool of the times, like I said, requirements I'm putting out there. It's a requirement of the times when we talk about leadership to now incorporate these elements that I mentioned earlier, specifically women, AI, right? Quantum innovation, conscious investment and capital, these kinds of things, to shape a future of a cadre, a new breed of Alpha Whisperers that are going to be more ethical, more accountable and responsible for the whispers that they give to the alphas, right?
Yes.
So that's the vision, and that's why I believe that episode 6, which is a new breed of Alpha Whisperers, is going to be where we are going to be so radical. I'm just putting it out there in really being radical in describing and creating a new breed of Alpha Whisperers. That keeps my blood going, Laura. Because
it's hopeful, Janet. It's hopeful and it's positive and it's really helping people. Because lots of people will say, oh, in the future, we need people who do this. We need leaders who will do that. We need people who are more like this, less like that. But how? And we're helping to pave the way for the how.
Yes. Exactly. Because again, one of my favorite sayings, and this is by Albert Einstein, right? He says, the world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything.
Yes.
So let that sink to our audience and our listeners.
Yes.
Right? The world will not be destroyed by those who do evil. Bad whispers, dark whispers, but by those who watch them without doing anything. So for me, this is my way of answering that call to action, coming up with a new breed of Alpha Whisperers that I know will help make this world a better place for all of us.
That is an amazing point. It summarized everything so beautifully, the importance of the transparency, the accountability, the ethical influence, all of these things to create the leader who's going to move progress forward and ensure that we're not turning a blind eye. Now we have steps to take to make sure that we're all moving together in the right direction and not just standing by silently and letting other power hungry people destroy what we're all looking to build. So
Exactly.
to everybody else out there, as we move through this series, ask yourself, what kind of alpha and or what kind of alpha whisperer do you choose to be? And how can you ensure that your influence, seen or unseen, serves the greater good? Any final thoughts, Janet?
I'm really obsessed about rethinking and reframing how power and influence work at the top level and, down the line, right? Any level. And I know and I believe in my heart that leadership is not only confined to the alphas who are out there on stage speaking, have the megaphone, right? Leadership is something that also comes from behind the scene. And I'm on a mission to tap into that behind the scene potent power and influence to make sure that our leadership trajectory goes into where it should be, which is to use that leadership for the greater good.
Yes. And there's different kinds of leadership, right? There's leadership from behind, leadership from the front, leadership from the side, et cetera. And it sounds like the alpha whisperers are leading from behind. They're just leading, guiding, advising, use whatever synonym you like. They're leading the alphas.
Yes, exactly. And that in itself, to me, is a very, very powerful responsibility that should not be left unchecked as well.
Yes.
So it's a double-edged sword. I'm encouraging everyone to use the power of their whisper for the greater good, because every whisper matters. But at the same time, I want to hold everyone who identifies as an alpha whisperer to be accountable for your whisper.
Yes, beautiful. So with that, allow me to invite you all to subscribe, to rate the podcast, follow the series. And Janet, where can people go to learn more?
Thank you, Laura. It's alphawhisperer.com, alphawhisperershouse.com, and we're also on LinkedIn, Instagram, X. You can also find me on my LinkedIn as well. I mean, I'm all over the internet, but JanetSalazar.co if you want to know more about the founder and creator of Alpha Whisperers, and I'm on LinkedIn.
Love it. And would invite people to connect on LinkedIn as well. But if you do, let us know that you heard us here on the Alpha Whisperers Genesis podcast. Janet, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for starting this journey for all of us. I can't wait for episode 2.
Thank you, Laura. This has been a delight and to be continued.